Hello, my name is Dr. Jonathan Oates, archivist for the London Borough of Ealing, and this is a rather longer talk than the shorter videos that we've been doing on location. This is a talk about black actors in Ealing studio films between 1935 and 1954. Now, Ealing Studios, which are the oldest studios in the world, date back to about 1909, and they're usually thought of as producing quintessential English films, especially in the 1930s to the 1950s. These films probably now seem like ancient history, and younger people probably think they're from another planet. But those people who know the Ealing studio films probably recall the Ealing comedies. They probably remember such well-known actors as Alec Guinness, Margaret Rutherford, Sid James, Herbert Lom, and many others. However, even those people who remember the Ealing studio films probably don't think that any black actors were ever employed at this time. It's true that no black actor appeared in any of the comedies, but Ealing Studios filmed a lot more than just the comedies. There are a number of films in this series which do feature black actors, and this was quite unusual in British cinema at the time. Partly, of course, because in this period there were relatively few black people in Britain. If they appeared in films, it was usually films which were set overseas, such as Africa and India. So, for example, films like The Drum, which starred obviously Indian actors such as Sabu and others, and of course in the Tarzan films, which were set in Africa. However, there are 5 Ealing studio films which feature black actors, and we'll examine these films, the actors, and how they were perceived both at the time and afterwards. So, we'll start with 1935, and the film, this is a picture of Ealing Studios from above, and we'll start with a film, Mr. Midshipman Easy, which is a 1935 film directed by Carol Reed, who's better known for Third Man, and it's based on the book Mr. Midshipman Easy by Captain Frederick Marriott, who, apart from being a sailor, has also Ealing connections, because coincidentally he was educated at the Great Ealing School. It's an adventure film, quite a short film, about 75 minutes long, black and white of course, and it features a young hero who's a midshipman in the Royal Navy during the 1790s. It's basically about his adventures in capturing a Spanish ship, in rescuing civilians on shore, and also dealing with convicts and pirates as well. So it's quite a low budget, short adventure film, quite entertaining. You can see it for free online, or you can see it on as part of the Ealing Rarities series of DVDs showing less well-known Ealing films. So this film might well now be seen as a sort of B-movie. It's not a bad film, but it's not particularly outstanding, except for one thing. That is, there is a character in the film called Mesty. He is played by Robert Adams, and he's a sailor on board the ship HMS Harpy, a Royal Navy sloop, alongside a midshipman of the title. At first, Mesty is shown in a fairly humble role. He's cooking meals, he's serving food to midshipmen. However, later in the film, Mesty is seen as a prominent supporting actor. He's shown as being brave in fighting alongside his comrades. He's shown as responsible and giving good advice to the young hero, advice that the hero does not always take. During the storm at sea, Mesty helps to steer the ship out of danger, in contrast to the majority of his shipmates who are drunk. So he's seen as quite a capable, brave, responsible and intelligent character. Because of this, he's promoted to the rank of corporal, which of course is not a rank in the Royal Navy, and the term petty officer would probably be used instead. Later on in the film, he helps to defend a number of civilians who are under attack by pirates and convicts, one of whom, incidentally, is also black. When Don Silvio, the leading bandit, is about to kill Mr. Midshipman Easy, it is Meste who saves his life. He fights Don Silvio and throws him over the cliff. One critic in recent times has later said of the film, it boasts several excellent performances and one which is downright outstanding. A remarkable performance by Robert Adams, a black actor who plays Meste. He's promoted to the rank of corporal and saves Easy's life by fighting the Italian desperado and throwing him over a cliff. The class and bravery of this black character in a 1935 British film outpaces anything I can think of in an American film of the era. Robert Adams himself had been born in British Guiana in 1902. He was the son of a boat builder and he won a scholarship to attend college and qualified as a teacher in the 1920s. He took part in amateur dramatics and came to England to become a professional actor. At first he worked as a labourer and as a wrestler known as the Black Eagle, and he was so good at wrestling he won the British Empire Championship in 1931. He also became politically active and was a founder member of the League of Coloured Peoples. In 1934 he began to act in films, and one of his first roles was in this Ealing film just mentioned, where he was given 4th top billing, so quite impressive for a relative newcomer in film. He also featured in films which starred Paul Robeson, who we'll come to later on, and he was even his stunt double in the film Proud Valley. He also appeared in films in the 1940s and 1950s, and at this time he was Britain's best known black actor. He appeared in the film Sapphire, a film made about race relations, which was made in the aftermath of the 1958 Notting Hill riots. He founded the Negro Repertory Arts Company and also starred in TV and in the theatre. In 1960, he effectively retired, went back to British Guiana and died there in 1965. As a historical note, it's worth mentioning that there were black men in the British Army and Royal Navy in the 19th century who served alongside their British counterparts as opposed to being separate units. So it's not anachronistic or inaccurate to have a black sailor in a historical drama. The 1930s Scarlet Pimpernel film also shows in its opening sequence a marching regiment and band of a British army. The bandsmen are all black. Unfortunately, the film reviews of this fairly small film at the time did not have anything to say about individual performances, except to mention the leading young actor very briefly. But I seem to think it was a fairly fast-moving little adventure story, so we don't really know what people thought of Adams' acting or even his appearance. But I think it's worth mentioning that in the 1930s, Hollywood films, where they showed black people, tended to show them as being either comedians or as being fools. But Adams in this film is certainly not shown in either comic light or an idiot light, but as a strong supporting character. We'll now come to a better known black actor and singer called Paul Robeson. I've already mentioned him because he was in several British films in the 1930s already, such as Sanders of the River and various other films, and because he could sing well, he also normally sang in his films as well as acted. Now, his Ealing studio film was in Proud Valley, which was set in a Welsh coal mining village in the 1930s, just before World War II. It was directed by Paul Tennyson in the second of his 3 Ealing films. Paul Robeson, as you can see, is highlighted on the film poster, so he is top billing in this Ealing Studios film, which is perhaps quite well known. It's been available on DVD for some time. Paul Robeson's character, John's for a village choir, as well as working down in the mine. And as someone says, down in the mine, we're all black. As said, Robeson's stunt double was Robert Adams, who I've already mentioned in the previous film. Robeson also knew John Alexander Barber James's sons and helped him in his career as a singer in films and live performance. Barber James is the best known black man living in Acton in the 1920s and 30s, and is very prominent politically as well. Paul Robeson, as said, is the star of the film Proud Valley. On posters advertising the film, as you can see, he's the only actor depicted, and he's mentioned to be the Samson of song, as important as a singer as well as being an actor. In the film, he plays David Goliath, and these names are surely carefully chosen to emphasise his strength, both moral and physical, an underdog who overcomes mighty odds, as in the Bible story. He's a sailor who deserts his ship whilst in port and travels to a Welsh coal mining town. He's poverty-stricken, and as is shown by the condition of the boots as he's walking along the road, they have holes in them. In the village, he's recruited into the chapel choir and lodges with the choir master's family. When the choir master hears his singing on choir practice night, he says to David, "Come on up, friend," and David's former companion says, "Same to you," after David wishes him good luck. In the mining disaster in the film, in which many men are killed, David Goliath tries to rescue them, and he pulls out a survivor who unfortunately dies shortly afterwards. Because of the disaster, the mine closes down, and we are shown David singing in the choir in a competition. Later on, 4 miners, including David, walk to London to ask the government to have the mine reopened. Unfortunately, they do not succeed, so they try to reopen the mine themselves, but are met with another disaster, and David and 3 other men are trapped underground. David sacrifices himself to save the others, because one of the others' family had already died in the previous accident. His comrades pray over his body. Finally, the film ends, however, on an optimistic note as the miners return to work to help the war effort, as it is now 1939. Robeson's role dominates all the reviews of the film. One wrote, "Paul Robeson is ideally cast as the huge but simple-minded Negro tramp to whom the inhabitants give a job in the coal mine. He first enters the film as a street singer, looking for work, but his superb voice captures the admiration of the community choir, and before long he's leading them in preparation for the Ifested festival. Then comes a terrific explosion, which results in the death of a choir master, to whom he has become a devoted. In a highly dramatic climax, in which the star is trapped in the mines with several colleagues, he sacrifices his life in order to save them all from certain death. Robeson's musical numbers are Deep River, All Through the Night, and Land of My Fathers. Another newspaper reported, "Paul Robeson gives a brilliant performance, and his singing, especially when accompanied by a Welsh choir, is delightful." Another newspaper said that he was playing a coloured seaman and focused on his singing. Robeson's deep bass voice has never better been heard to great advantage. He was said to be the world's most famous coloured singer, and the Ealing newspaper noted that Robeson played a Negro stoker. As with Midshipman Easy, the story's background is authentic enough. Robeson's character was based on the real-life story of a black man from Virginia who took a ship across the Atlantic and worked in a coal mine in Wales. Initially, Robeson was reluctant to take work at a British film studios, but when he learned that the film was not showing his character as a caricature but as a real man, he agreed to take on the role. He was also sympathetic towards the plight of the working class. Robeson said that this film was his favourite film role because it was supportive of the working man, as well as black people. The film generally went down well with audiences and critics at the time. Paul Robeson was born in America, in New Jersey in 1898. He went to college and he was known there for his athletics ability as well as his performances in amateur dramatics. In the 1920s, he began to appear on film and stage. More controversially, in the 1930s, he began to espouse communist views and was a fervent admirer of the Soviet Union, which was then led by Joseph Stalin. He lived in Britain and he also visited the Soviet Union. Interestingly enough, he also played white characters as well as black characters and whitened up as opposed to blacking up for various of his roles. In 1940, he returned to America. He's the first black actor to play Othello, of course a black character. After the war, he lobbied the American government to deal with the lynchings of black people, but he also denied that the Soviet Union was oppressive. He played Othello in Britain, and he was the first black man to sing at St. Paul's Cathedral. He retired from acting in 1963 because of ill health, and he died in 1976. By now, he is usually remembered for his anti-racist campaigning and for his acting and his singing. His role as an apologist for the Soviet Union is largely overlooked. The next Ealing studio film to show a black character was Pool of London. This was made in 1950 and is directed by Basil Dearden, just 2 years after the arrival of the Windrush at Tilbury, bringing 492 black people from the West Indies. This film, Pool of London, was a mixture of social commentary about working lives in and around the docks in the East End of London, and was also in part a crime drama. Ealing Studios had made a number of films just after World War II in East London, such as It Always Rains on Sunday, 1947, and Hue and Cry in 1946. The first film shows a strong female character, which is also partly a crime drama, along the lines of The Blue Lamp of 1950, which was also directed by Basil Dearden. The Sketch newspaper in 1951 reviewed The Pool of London and was largely disappointed at the missed opportunities it represented, saying that the film became a fairly standard crime drama in its second half. However, it did praise one of the actors, an outstanding performance by a young coloured actor, and in more detail, it noted, "It should be welcomed too, and will certainly be remembered for the performance of a young coloured actor from Bermuda called Earl Cameron. Mr. Cameron plays the part of a sailor who falls in love with a white girl during his 2 days shore leave, finds in her sympathy and kindness, a shy, golden kindness, but cares for her deeply enough to refuse the love she is eager to offer him. Colour doesn't matter, she impulsively tells him. Colour, he assures her, still does matter. It is a beautiful little sketch, unfinished, through no fault of Mr. Cameron's." Another newspaper highlighted his role. "The finest acting is from Earl Cameron as a coloured seaman befriended by a white girl. Here, almost involuntarily, in simple, human and undemonstrative terms, is one of the most tender moments of the colour problem the screen has given us." Another contemporary critic recalled that the film was remarkable for some fine work by Earl Cameron, and that the film gives the viewer something to think about thereafter. Despite this being his first ever film, Earl Cameron is given 5th billing, and his name is one of the stars highlighted on the film posters advertising it. and this is remarkable for a new actor. He plays Johnny Lomax, one of the sailors on board the cargo ship Dunbar. He is a very pleasant character. He strikes up a friendship with a British young woman, the first British film to show an interracial romance, and some years, needless to say, before an American film would portray it. Another way in which Ealing Studios was a pioneer, as with the other films mentioned already. In the film, the young woman shows Earl Cameron's character some of the sights, such as the National Maritime Museum and Greenwich Observatory. It is a non-physical romance, and of course goes nowhere. Cameron, interviewed many years later, said, "To me, it was a natural thing. She was a girl and I was a man. In real life, he was married to a white woman." In the film, he tells her that when he's steering the ship at night time, he thinks, "You wonder why a man is white and why a man is black. And God himself, what colour is he?" By at least one character, however, Johnny is seen in a rather condescending manner, and suspicion is directed towards him and others of a crime. The detective says, "The coloured boy, if you ask me, they're all in it together." Cameron was born in Bermuda in 1917 and joined the British Merchant Navy in the 1930s. He arrived in London in 1939. He then left the Navy and struck up a romance with a local girl, but like in the film, it does not last. Whilst doing menial work, he began to get jobs on the stage and as a singer in the 1940s. This film, Port of London, was his first film, and it was said, and clearly wrongly as we know, that this is the first major role for a black actor in mainstream British film. But as noted, both Robert Adams and Paul Robeson had got there first. In Earl Cameron's later career, he had many roles in both British film and British TV series, including Doctor Who, and also Thunderball, a James Bond film set in the Caribbean in 1965, and he was also in Tarzan films. As with Robert Adams, he was in the film Sapphire in 1959. His film and TV career spanned the decades until a few years ago. He was given many honours, both in Britain and in Bermuda. He died in Kenilworth in 2020. Outside of Britain, Ealing Studio Films filmed stories set in both Australia and Africa. I believe in this talk series we're going to have a talk about the Australian films, but here we'll talk about the African films which were shot in the Ealing Studios, obviously on location. These films are Where No Vultures Fly, 1951, and West of Zanzibar in 1954. West of Zanzibar is basically a sequel to Where No Vultures Fly, and both of them have some of the same characters. The first film was very popular in Britain in 1952. It also did well in America. Now, unfortunately, I haven't actually seen the film Where No Vultures Fly, but it initially shows black Africans shooting at animals with bows and arrows, and later on we see black characters as assistant game wardens, which perhaps suggests a primitiveness and a subserviveness. The second film is perhaps even more contentious. The second film is West of Zanzibar, and that shows, it's a film about a tribe in Mombasa who are relocated to Mombasa after having made the decision to do so. The tribal chief, Ushinga, is unhappy with what happens, and in this film basically shows Africans as being almost irresponsible children, needing the guidance and protection of a white man and white woman, and the chief explicitly states this. When two of his sons are caught in the ivory smuggling trade, the game warden's wife prevails upon the game warden, Robert Steele, to release them rather than to send them to prison for their crimes. Ushinga says that the African is always to blame whenever a single African does anything wrong, or when an African falls into temptation. In this film, the tempter is a group of Arab ivory dealers willing to pay Africans for ivory and for rhino horns, which are taken illegally from animals that have been killed. We are told that the Arabs used to buy Africans in the past as slaves for harems and palaces, but now they buy other illegal goods. And it's the white game warden who sets off with his wife and child to Zanzibar to hunt down the villainous Arabs. With them is a black game warden, Mkwange, played by Orlando Martins in the picture here. Orlando Martins also appears prominently in Where No Vultures Fly as well. Now, it's worth noting that in the film West of Zanzibar, we are shown black people in positions of responsibility and authority. For example, there's a school for black children, which is run by a black teacher. There's a magistrates' court, which is run by black officials and black magistrates. There's also a Paris-educated lawyer who describes himself as Persian and Phoenician. He is the villain of the drama. He has a great contempt for Africans, referring to them as the primitive black people, a slum savage, and that their lot is regrettable but inevitable. However, later in the film, he says to the white game warden, Peyton, "You must save me from these savages." So clearly this Arab character has a very low opinion of black people, and he also turns out to be the leader of a smuggling gang. A criticism of the white character, Peyton, is given by a young black man who says to him, "You're not wanted, go home, government man." But his chief, Oshinga, immediately remonstrates with him. In later scenes, we are shown Oshinga as saving Peyton's life when he's threatened by a leopard, and later Oshinga dies heroically but arguably pointless in a one-man attempt to stop the smugglers. In tracking and attacking the smugglers, it is Peyton who leads the black tribe in defeating them in a fight, and Oshinga's son at the end of the film is shown as being suitably grateful and says, "We are very thankful, Mr. Peyton," and states, "We must learn to walk before we can run." And Peyton states once more that he feels that the tribe are his responsibility, and his wife encourages him in this. Now, the film was not shown in Kenya, and also it was banned in India following protests from African students. This was because it was seen as being paternalistic in his attitudes to black people, depicting the tribe as needing protection by white people against exploitation from others. However, at the end, it is worth noting that the exploited tribe does turn against its exploiter, and commercially speaking, the film was a success. One of the first newspaper reviews states, "The film has a vague message to the effect that African natives have a lot of good in them. One saves the hero's life, and that Africa has a future." And another states, "All African actors bring immense vitality and gusto to their parts." Another says that Orlando Martins, playing the same role as in the first film, was seen stealing, and another noted his other roles. A contemporary newspaper wrote that he was one of the world's finest coloured actors, puts in another winning performance as the servant Mkwange. Almost stealing the picture is the native beau Juma, a chirpy street Arab who plays himself. It was also said Negro actor Orlando Martins is notable in the supporting cast. Both he and Eric Connor, another black actor in the film, show both talent and dignity. Eric Connor plays Oshinga, the tribal chief. Eric Connor was born in Trinidad in 1913. He arrived in England in 1944, and he gave many performances, both as a singer and an actor, on TV and film. He lived in London until his death in 1968. He and his wife founded an agency for black actors and performers in the 1950s, and they also founded the Negro Theatre Workshop in the 1960s. Orlando Martins was born in Lagos, Nigeria in 1899, and he joined the Royal Navy in the First World War. He arrived in London in 1919. Looking for work, he took the part of an extra in a West End theatre, and later he became a wrestler. Black Butcher Johnson was his name, wrestling snakes in circuses, a bit like Robert Adams had, of course. His film debut was in 1926, and he went on to appear in films in the 1930s alongside Paul Robeson and many other actors in the next 3 decades. His last role was in a film in 1971. As with Adams and Cameron, he appeared in Sapphire, a film that clearly every British actor in Britain was in this masterpiece, which if you haven't seen it, and although it's not an Ealing Studio film, I would strongly recommend it because it examines many forms of prejudice in Britain in the 1950s in the guise of a detective drama. Martins died in 1985 in Lagos. The third black actor in these 2 African set films is Juma Omar, born in 1943 and was a child actor. He was born in Zanzibar and died in London very early in 1989. And he was in 3 more films, including the Hammer film Fury at Smuggler's Bay, which also starred Bernard Lee and Peter Cushing. Unfortunately, unlike the other actors mentioned in this talk, he does not seem to have progressed into adult TV roles, either in film or stage or TV. But in this film, West of Zanzibar, he's clearly meant to be the cheeky child who performances that audiences will find endearing, although some might say his character has been rather irritating and annoying. There are numerous other black actors, of course, in this film, naturally enough, because it is shot in Kenya. They are portrayed as basically traditional people, living lifestyles which their ancestors probably also lived. So we see lots of examples of tribal dancing and drumming, and in some ways this comes across as what you might call tourist Africa, and presumably it was meant to be. To conclude this brief survey of black actors in Ealing Studio films, there were a number of black actors employed in Ealing Studio films from 1935 to 1954. Orlando Martins and Robert Adams appeared in at least 2 of these films. Paul Robeson, Eric Connor, Juma and Earl Cameron all appeared in 1. All were male. Several of them lived in Britain for lengthy periods, but 3 of them returned to the land of their birthplace after retirement. These actors all had prominent roles in these films. Paul Robeson, of course, was the star of Proud Valley, and the others, although they were not the #1 star in the film, they all had very important supporting roles, and often their names featured prominently in posters advertising the films. In these films, black actors did not appear as mere cameo roles or as comic roles, as appeared often in American films of the 1930s and 1940s. So, for example, in that otherwise great Errol Flynn Western, Dodge City, 1940, there's a black train driver, and here he is as a mere cameo comic role. The black actors in these films did not appear in those ways at all. They were not shown as being stupid, but as being real, important characters. And this is historically authentic. For example, as I've said, black people were in the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. There were black men in coal mines in Wales in the 1930s as well. So these are genuine roles. They're authentic historically. They are playing sort of real important characters. Most of these actors also went on to portray roles in British TV, film, and on the stage for decades to come. And the Ealing films certainly allowed them to showcase their many talents. The first 3 films mentioned, Midshipman, Easy, Proud Valley and Pool of London, are probably the better ones of these 3 films, because in the 2 later ones, set in the early 1950s, the black actors are primarily shown in fairly subservient roles, which is certainly not so in the first 3 films. So if you haven't seen any of these films, please do so, and I'm sure you'll find them interesting as well as enjoyable. I hope people have liked this video, Please remember to tick the like box. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for viewing, and please send any comments or suggestions. Thank you.